Monday morning. The lobby of Sterling Encumbered Bank looked exactly as it always did. Polished marble floors, soft piano music drifting through the air, employees moving with practiced calm. But for Jamal Whitaker, today didn't feel routine. Not anymore. After 9 quiet years of working behind the scenes, he had just been promoted. Assistant Director of Client Services. It should have been a big deal, but there was no celebration, no team email, no handshake from the branch manager, just a dry HR message and a few stiff nods from coworkers in the hallway. But Jamal wasn't surprised. He was used to putting in the work and getting little in return. He'd watched people like him get passed over, not because they weren't qualified, but because they didn't fit the unspoken image of who belonged in leadership. And clients like Harry? He'd seen them too. Left waiting in lobbies, talked down to, quietly pushed aside. Jamal had stayed silent before. Because he didn't have a title, no power, no real seat at the table. But now, he had a door with his name on it, a voice that might actually be heard, and a promise he had made to himself. If I ever get the chance, I'm not just going to sit quietly. That same morning, a calendar notification pinged his screen. Meeting, Brand Strategy, Equity and Inclusion, invited by Henry Whitmore. CEO Jamal stared at it. A seat at the table. But why now? Was he here to contribute or to help the room look more diverse? He didn't know. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just another meeting, and he wasn't going to treat it like one. Later, as Jamal stood in his small office, sunlight poured through the blinds, warming the edge of his desk. Outside, the city kept moving, but inside this bank, something was shifting. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't just be another voice in the room. He might be the one to finally change it. The next morning, Jamal found himself seated at the far end of a long walnut conference table. The ninth floor boardroom was bright, too bright. Everything inside it looked clean, expensive, controlled. Around him, men in tailored suits flipped through printed packets, occasionally nodding or offering polite smiles. The kind that looked friendly, but didn't mean anything. On the wall, a projector displayed the title slide, Rebranding Strategy, Inclusion and Equity. It sounded noble, strategic, safe. But as Jamal scanned the room, he could feel it. This wasn't about change, not real change. This was about controlling the story, about making the headlines go away, about looking like a better bank without having to become one. Then Henry walked in, calm, measured, CEO energy, as always. He looked across the room and held Jamal's eyes for just a second longer than necessary. A message. You're here for a reason. The meeting began. Henry talked about reputation, about community trust, about the opportunity to show leadership during a cultural moment. And then, Jamal, Henry said, we'd love to hear your perspective as someone with a more lived experience. All eyes turned, not with curiosity, but with expectation. This wasn't an invitation to speak freely. It was an invitation to say the right thing, to play along, to keep the room comfortable. Jamal looked around. He wanted to tell the truth, to speak about what he'd seen, the way Black clients were treated like risks, the way his coworkers learned to smile while dismissing someone's humanity. But then, his eyes caught the projector screen behind him, a stock photo, smiling employees. In the center, a Black man in a blazer. It wasn't him, but it might as well have been. They hadn't brought Jamal into this room for his insight. They had brought him here so no one could accuse them of ignoring people like him. He swallowed hard, sat back slightly, and paused. This wasn't just about what he said today. It was about what he would choose to stand for tomorrow. And in that moment, Jamal understood something. This room wasn't ready for the truth. Not yet. But one day, it would be. And when that day came, he wouldn't just be sitting at the table. He'd be leading it. Wednesday morning. From the second-floor balcony, Jamal looked down at the lobby below. It was quiet, efficient, just like always. The same polished floors, the same soft greetings, the same front desk, and sitting at that desk was still Bertha. Jamal watched silently. Everything looked normal. But then the glass door slid open, and something shifted. She walked in slowly. A woman in her 70s in a floral print dress, with silver hair neatly tied back. She moved carefully, one hand holding an old leather purse, the other clutching a small stack of documents, worn but orderly. Her name was Gloria. She approached the desk, soft-spoken. "I'd like to withdraw from my savings," she said. "Here's my ID and account information." Bertha looked up, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Do you have a verification letter?" This kind of transaction usually requires extra documentation. Gloria blinked, confused. "I've never needed that before," she said gently. "I've been banking here for years." Bertha shrugged, flat, dismissive. "Well, the rules changed." Jamal was already walking, each step slow, measured, but firm. He'd seen this before. The way a voice could be wrapped in politeness but still mean, "You don't belong here." By the time he reached the desk, Gloria had gone quiet, her shoulders stiff. Her hands clutched her papers tightly, as if ready for yet another door to close. Jamal stepped beside her. "Good morning, Ms. Hamilton," he said softly. "I'm Jamal, Assistant Director of Client Services. Mind if I take a look?" She handed him the documents. He scanned them. Everything was valid. Nothing was missing. He turned to Bertha. "When did we start requiring extra verification for accounts in perfect standing?" Bertha hesitated, fumbled. "I was just being cautious." Jamal didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He turned back to Gloria. "Thank you for your patience. I'll handle this personally, and going forward, we'll make sure your experience here feels exactly the way it should." Gloria didn't say anything, but her eyes, they softened. And when she reached out, her hand gently touched Jamal's. Not to thank him, not to apologize, but to say, "I see you, and I trust you." Across the room, someone quietly pulled out their phone. They started recording. Not for drama, not for attention, but because they knew this moment mattered. A bank officer doing what few had dared to do before, make dignity visible. That video, just 60 seconds long, would travel farther than anyone expected. Same bank, different person. And this time, someone on the inside didn't stay silent. Jamal sat at his desk. The coffee next to him had gone cold, but he hadn't taken a sip in over an hour, his mind still replaying what happened that morning. Gloria, at the front desk, holding out her documents, standing so still, so quiet, as Bertha denied her. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't complained. She just lowered her eyes, like someone who had been through that exact moment too many times before. But what stayed with Jamal wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't. When she turned to look at him before walking out, that glance, calm, soft, but filled with something deep. It wasn't disappointment, it was trust. The kind of trust that says, "I'm not going to fight this, but I hope you will." He looked at his computer. A new email was waiting. Subject, viral video. Assistant Director's response gains public attention. He clicked, and there it was. The clip, 1 minute long. Bertha's flat voice, Gloria's polite insistence, and then his own voice, clear and steady. "Ms. Hamilton, I'll take care of this personally." Then came that moment, the touch of her hand on his, gentle, unshaking. Below the video were thousands of comments. Finally, someone stepped in. "This is what leadership looks like. Same bank, new chapter." Then his phone buzzed. It was Henry Whitmore. "I need to see you in my office. 30 minutes. That was all he said. No context, no tone, just now. Jamal sat there for a moment, not moving, not because he was afraid, but because he knew. This was the moment where the line would be drawn. He rose, straightened his shirt, and walked down the long hallway, where every step felt like a decision. He passed colleagues who looked at him differently now, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, some with quiet respect. He didn't speak, didn't need to. They all knew. He was no longer just the guy from the video. He was the one people were watching, the one they were waiting to see. Will he stay quiet, or will he keep walking forward? Outside Henry's office, he paused, took one deep breath, then knocked 3 times, firm, certain, unapologetic. And as the door opened, Jamal walked in. Not as a man caught in controversy, but as a man who chose to no longer look away. Jamal stepped out of Henry's office. No words, no celebration, just silence and the echo of what had just been said. "You've put us at the center of a storm. Now I need you to help steer it." 5 minutes. That was all the meeting had lasted, but it was enough, because something had shifted, not just in policy, but in power. The next morning, an email was sent across all branches of Sterling & Co., over 200 offices, thousands of employees. The subject line was simple: leadership announcement, Director of Diversity and Equity, and right beneath it, a single image, a still frame from the viral video. Jamal, reaching for Gloria's hand. No filters, no slogans, no corporate spin, just a man doing what was right when it mattered most. The internet picked it up instantly. News sites, community forums, LinkedIn, Twitter, everywhere. The clip wasn't just viral anymore. It had become symbolic, a moment people could point to and say, "This is what change can look like." The hashtag took off. Respect with action. And for once, Sterling & Co. wasn't being talked about for its investments, but for something far more valuable: its humanity. Bertha quietly left the company. No send-off, no goodbye cake, just an empty desk and a lesson left behind. But a few days later, Jamal received something unexpected: a handwritten letter from her. "I used to think that following the rules made me fair, but tone is a language too, and I had been speaking it wrong for years." And Gloria? She didn't ask for attention, didn't want the spotlight, but Jamal called her anyway, invited her to a new initiative, a client roundtable, a space for voices like hers to guide what the future of banking should feel like. When he asked if she wanted to speak, she paused, then simply said, "I'm not angry. I just don't want the next woman after me to feel invisible." That was all, and it was everything. The last turning point came at a leadership summit. Henry was on stage. He finished his address, took off his mic, walked off stage, and went straight to Jamal, in front of executives, in front of staff. He said, "I didn't bring you in to fix an image. I brought you in to change what that image means." From that moment, Jamal wasn't just a symbol or a headline or a title in an org chart. He was a presence, a pulse inside the institution. Proof that change didn't always have to come from outside protest. Sometimes it begins with a single voice inside, choosing not to stay silent anymore. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Sterling and Cohen Bank felt different. Not louder, not faster, just quieter in a way that made people pay attention. There were no sweeping speeches, no banners hung from the ceilings, no slogans echoing from HR. But still, something had changed. People started asking better questions. Co-workers who never looked Jamal in the eye now greeted him by name. New voices began to speak in meetings. And for the first time in a long time, some people, especially the quiet ones, were finally being heard. Then came the announcement. Henry Whitmore stood before the entire company. A live broadcast. All branches tuned in. No background music. No branding behind him. Just one man, wearing the weight of his role, finally ready to say what needed to be said. "We followed procedures," he began. "But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing people behind the process. This isn't about fixing perception. It's about building something that deserves to be trusted." And then he did what few leaders dare. He stepped back and made space. Real space. New changes followed. A culture oversight committee led by Jamal. An anonymous reporting line. Bias training made mandatory starting with the top. Client interviews conducted randomly to test what really happens when no one's watching. This wasn't window dressing. It was scaffolding for something new to be built from the inside out. One afternoon, a letter arrived in Jamal's office. From Bertha, not emailed, not typed, written in her own hand. "I thought being neutral meant being professional, but silence isn't neutral when it protects harm, and now I finally understand why you acted." Jamal folded the letter, set it aside. No response needed. The words had already done their job. And Gloria, she showed up, not to protest, not to speak for attention, but to sit in a circle of clients and tell her story, so no one else would have to live it. When someone asked her why she agreed to come, she smiled softly and said, "Because someone listened." The final moment came at a private event. Henry was stepping off stage. No crowd, no applause, just Jamal, waiting near the exit. Henry walked up, met his eyes, and said one sentence he had never said before. "You didn't just change the story. You changed who gets to write it." And with that, it was no longer about one man in a suit or one woman at a front desk or one moment caught on camera. It was about a shift in how people were treated, in who got to be heard, in what it meant to lead. Because real change doesn't announce itself loudly. It walks quietly into rooms where no one expects it and refuses to leave. True change doesn't always start with grand speeches or massive movements. Sometimes it begins with one quiet moment, one person refusing to stay silent. Jamal didn't step into power to impress anyone. He didn't act to be seen. He acted because something inside him knew. Dignity should never depend on how someone looks, speaks, or dresses. This story reminds us that injustice doesn't always scream. It whispers. It hides in small policies, in delayed appointments, in subtle glances that say, "You don't belong here." But when one person chooses to break that pattern, when one person chooses to see, to speak, to act, the ripple spreads further than they could ever imagine. Jamal wasn't trying to change the system. He was just trying to do what was right. And that's exactly how systems change. So wherever you are, whatever room you find yourself in, don't underestimate the power of one steady voice, spoken at the right moment, on behalf of someone who's been waiting far too long to be heard. Because sometimes the quietest stand becomes the loudest legacy.